So good morning, Nick. It's really great for you to join me today so we can talk about sleep, because we had a fantastic conversation about, I think, in December. And it was I think actually the conversation only ran out after an hour because the phone battery died, if I remember rightly, rather than us running out of things to say. And so I was really keen to have this conversation today so that I can hear a bit more about what you have to say about sleep, because there was lots and lots of really good stuff, but also so that you can share it because you're a true expert in this field. So do you want to introduce yourself a little bit about your company, Elite Sleep, and what you do? And then I've got lots of questions I want to ask you.
Sure. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, it's really great to be here. And yeah, it was fantastic to have a good conversation the other day and explain to you about what I do. So a lot of the work that I do with Elite Sleep is working with companies to try and get them to understand the value of having a positive sleep culture within their workplace. And that means understanding that if you put sleep first, then your performance levels of your employees will improve. But not only that, things like the job satisfaction and also engagement will improve because of it. So we work to understand how the culture of the environment works at the time, and then any improvements that can be made to try and increase the ability of individuals to improve their performance by prioritizing their sleep. I also work one-on-one with individuals who may have sleep problems. So trying to get them to find out exactly what's happened and why they may be experiencing sleep problems, and then finding the best ways to kind of manage any sleep problems that they may have. And then we kind of try and relate the improvements of the individuals to their performance, and then we try and see how the performance levels can increase due to not just their sleep improving, but also how they function throughout the day, and get them to perform to their peak in a similar sort of way that athletes do. So different times of the day, you'll be able to perform different tasks to different levels, and athletes would generally do that throughout the day. And so what we're trying to do is get people to sleep and live and train like athletes, but in the workplace.
Like it. And you know what, it's really interesting, that whole, I like your link to athletes, because always people think about athletes as being very elite. And actually, when I work with organizations around performance and, you know, getting the right culture so that people can go along and be their best and really perform well, it all fits in, doesn't it, to this notion of actually people being able to be at their peak performance and be able to kind of fulfill their potential. And actually, that's a really interesting point, because when I go in, you know, I've noticed more and more and more, whether it's wearing my psychotherapy hat doing individual work, or whether it's going into organizations doing organization-wide work, that sleep keeps coming up more and more and more as an issue that people are experiencing in terms of getting in the way of them being able to be fully engaged in the workplace and being able to perform. Why do you think that's the case in terms of it seeming to be more prevalent in terms of being a problem?
I think people are a lot more, firstly, aware of it. I think a lot of the information that we take into our society and into the workplace does originate from athletes, whether it's through nutrition or exercise or training regimes. And you see a lot of people who are able to train and eat and try and imitate the way that athletes do, but they don't imitate the way that athletes sleep. And in the last 10 years, it's become prevalent within the athletic society. And my background originally was through the athletic society. That sleep is fundamental to performance. So it's not just a pillar, but it is the foundation that everything else is built upon. It's very hard to sustain good nutritional levels and eat well. It's very hard to exercise to your potential and also cognitively and physically perform to your peak if you haven't slept well. And in the workplace, we see a huge disregard for sleep. It's the first thing that everybody would give up. It's the first thing that I used to give up, or everybody I know gives up. And that's because it's seen as a kind of a waste of time. It's a time when you can't be productive, you get things done, you can't work on problems, and it's seen as kind of dead time. But there's a lot of research that's come out, and what my job is to take the scientific research and then deliver that to kind of non-academic audiences, and get people to understand that sleep is one of the busiest times of the day. It's actually the time of day where you do most of your work. So firstly, there are three kind of main theories as to why people sleep. So the first theory is the energy saving theory, which is when you're asleep, you store up energy to then use it through the day. And that used to be the old belief of sleep a long time ago. But science has shown that the energy reserves and the energy stores are actually very small. So it's the same as about as a hot dog bun. So that's not particularly a very good way of storing energy. So the other two ways are cell restoration. This is where your body repairs itself for any damage that's caused throughout the day. So for athletes, this is fundamental. And the last one is memory consolidation. So, and this is very important and relatable into the workplace. So throughout the nighttime period, there you have different periods of sleep. So you might have light sleep, non-REM sleep, and then REM sleep. And in those different periods, in non-REM sleep, you're going to have a large period of time when your memory consolidation occurs. So you will be selecting and kind of augmenting those sleep those memories during your sleep period. And what that enables you to do is to remember things and learn. And so there's a lot of studies that have occurred to show that when people are actually sleeping well, the cognitive performance the next day significantly improves. And that is relatable into the workplace. But to go back to your question, why is it disregarded? Well, firstly, it's disregarded because sleep is seen as, if you sleep a lot, you're historically seen as being weak, you're lazy, and you're incapable of kind of functioning properly. When in fact it's the complete opposite. So we have a society that says those people who get up at 9 o'clock are somehow nowhere near as strong or productive or organized as the people who get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So we have this old work ethic is the earlier that you wake up, the better human being that you are. And it's just not the case. It's just not true.
I'm really glad you said that, because I don't like early mornings.
Yeah, well, I mean, me neither. But living and sleeping to your rhythm will not just improve your cognitive and physical performance, but it will improve your health. It will massively, improve your health and also your mental and physical well-being as well.
So what do you say then to managers? Because kind of, picking up on that point about your performance and how if you don't have enough sleep, it impacts. When I have so many conversations with managers who are really keen to do some work around how to increase performance of their teams and how to get people more engaged and kind of, better empathy and communication and all that, with each other. And I talk a little bit about sleep on a very, very kind of simplistic level, in the sense that, some people are really struggling because they're actually working all hours and they're really, really tired. They're not getting enough sleep. And they'll say, yeah, so-and-so comes into my office in the morning and he says he's really tired, or, so-and-so's come in and she's like, I've only had 5 hours sleep last night. I'm so tired. He's like, yeah, but aren't we all in the same boat? You've got to get on with it. And I always say to these managers, actually, if someone's coming in and saying, actually, they were struggling with alcohol, or they were struggling with something else that was really impacting their performance, a manager would take that quite seriously and say, well, hang on, let me get you the right support, or let's look at how we can resolve that and work through that together. But if it's sleep, it's almost like like you just said, it's a disregard for it. It's almost like, well, you just get on and just sort yourself out, or just get on because aren't we all tired? What do you say to those managers?
I'd say that we always should be looking 10 years ahead. We should be looking at what will be the lifestyle, what will be the knowledge in 10 years' time. Do we want to be stuck in the old ways of living, or should we be looking at what's happening now and then looking towards the future. And if you look at the elite athletes such as Roger Federer or LeBron James, they have their own sleep coaches. And the reason they have that is because they understand that sleep is not just going to improve their performance, but it will fundamentally improve every aspect of their life. And so to the managers who are looking to find out whether or not sleep is important and how they can help their individuals, is to get them to realize that it is fundamental just to the performance, the engagement. It will reduce absenteeism. It will increase the happiness, the empathy, and there are lots of studies that have shown that. So there are some studies out there that have suggested that poor sleep is the cause for managers to be perceived as being an unappreciative boss, a kind of a boss that nobody wants to work from. So sleep deprivation is the high cause of that. You also see that people are less empathetic because they haven't slept properly. So for example, if you are my boss and I haven't slept well at all, whatever message and however enthusiastic that message is then put across to me, if I haven't slept properly, my engagement levels and my empathy towards you and my engagement into what you're selling is going to be significantly reduced, and therefore the output from myself and the engagement is going to be right down. And vice versa, if you were the boss and I was working and your employee and you haven't slept properly, then it doesn't matter how much hard work I do, it doesn't matter what time of the day I get in, if you haven't slept properly, there are always going to be negative connotations to my work, and people are always going to be perceived in dim light or less engaged or less enthusiastic from other people's work if they haven't slept properly. And if they're significantly sleep deprived as well.
I always think then as well, once you put both those people into the same room, or metaphorical room at the moment, but you kind of have a manager with poor sleep and an employee with poor sleep, and it's kind of recipe for disaster, isn't it? You almost, people can spend so long trying to get their work sorted, trying to work out how to be good at their role and so on, but they're missing the fundamental building blocks. And I talk a lot about, kind of the emotional arousal that goes on in the brain, and when we're tired, the impact that has on our emotional arousal increasing massively and kind of flooding and taking over our cognitive performance and our ability, as you say, to remember and to be able to plan and to be reasonable and to be able to communicate well, and all the stuff that we need in order to be able to do our jobs well goes straight out the window.
Exactly. As you say, the reasoning goes straight out the window. That's one of the first things that goes. And we're not talking here about significant sleep loss. We're talking about maybe people having 5 or 6 hours night of sleep, but only 4 days in a row. So that amount of sleep loss, which people might say, well, I get by on 6 hours. But the difference is that we can all get by on 6 hours, but for a short period of time.
Yes.
And that getting by is lower performance levels. And in the workplace, those lower performance levels might not come out as you producing less quality work, but they may have a wider impact on the culture within the business. So you may be more aggressive, you may be less reasonable, you may be less willing to see the effort that other people are putting in, and that's the less tangible effect of sleep deprivation on the workplace.
Yeah.
And one of the other major ones is the effect of immoral action. So there's a couple of interesting papers that came out a few years back on the impact of immoral behavior on the workplace due to sleep deprivation. So those people who were sleep deprived, 6 hours of nights of sleep, they were more likely to lie and cheat and take credit for other people's work. And obviously that will have significant impact on society. And there's also evidence out there that suggests that several major disasters have occurred because of sleep deprivation. So the Chernobyl disaster was attributed to the fact that the people were on such long shifts, working such long periods, that their attention and their understanding of significant major effects just weren't able to respond to those problems as much. And so what we really want to do is try and get people to understand that it's not just the tangible performance that's the problem. It's the widespread implications of sleep deprivation on the workplace. And if people are managers are looking to improve their workforce, not just the happiness and the tangible performance levels, but also the culture within their business, then it has to start with sleep, and it has to then from there trickle into behaviors which are associated with a better sleep culture.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's because you can have with people kind of in their own little silos with their head down, trying to just be performing to their best that their brain will allow them if they're tired. But actually, if you want to have a really what we think of as a successful workplace culture where everyone's happy to be and they like each other and they get on well together, then you've got to have that kind of level of emotional connection, emotional intelligence, empathy, and so on, which only comes from having enough sleep so your brain works well.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And if you look at, there are good companies out there are good cultures out there that have shown the way that, so for example, in several Scandinavian companies which force people to leave work at 4 o'clock in the winter months, so that they're not working through the nighttime. You know, you've seen huge increase in engagement in the workplace. People are far less likely to be absent. So absenteeism drops right down, as presenteeism drops right down. And so the message that we're trying to send out to here is not to get people to not work as hard but it's to work more efficiently in the period that they're working. So if you can increase your performance levels because your alertness levels are up and your reasoning levels are up and your creativity levels are up because you've slept well, then you're more likely to be efficient in the 9 hours that you're at work, as opposed to the 16 hours when you're absolutely whacked the entire day and then perpetuate the cycle. And then, 20 years down the road, we see increased burnout.
Yeah.
And that burnout is then a cause of the fact of long-term incremental sleep deprivation.
Yes, it's a vicious cycle, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think all this really highlights the need for companies to take such a holistic view to when they're thinking about, they want to increase productivity and performance, or they want to do something around the workplace culture and so on. You can't just focus on one little bit of it. You've got to focus on the whole. Lots of people focus on how to make their staff more efficient during the day, or how to kind of help them focus more rather than look at all the peripheral stuff going on and get distracted, and how to communicate better, but they kind of miss the building blocks of what happens outside of work. They tend to think, coming in my door, that's when I'm responsible, rather than thinking about a whole person. And that, in terms of those rhythms that you're talking earlier about, the Scandinavian countries kind of finishing at work earlier, and you talked a little bit throughout this conversation so far about rhythms. I know you're really interested in circadian rhythms and light. Tell us a bit more about that, because I know that's your kind of specialism.
Yeah, so your circadian rhythms are basically to do with your hormonal changes within your body throughout a 24-hour period. So naturally, your body will change hormones just to send different messages to say that it is daytime or nighttime, so that you know when to eat and to sleep, and you know when to function at your optimum during the time that it's light. And that kind of goes back to our ancestral days, when it was fundamental that we were awake during the light period so we didn't get predated, and that we could then rest and sleep at the night time when it was kind of a safer time to do so. And so the relationship of circadian rhythms into the workplace today can be played out in the stuff we've already talked about today. So your creativity levels will peak at certain times of the day, and your brainstorming ability will change depending on whether or not you're a morning type or an evening type at different times of the day. Not only that, but things like your alertness levels will go up as different hormones change. So as cortisol rises in the morning and your body says, let's be alert and let's be awake, it will happen at different times for each individual. And therefore, what I do is I work with individuals to try and get them to use these circadian rhythms and work with their circadian rhythms, as opposed to against their circadian rhythms. So it kind of goes back to you saying to me earlier on that that you're less productive at 6 in the morning than you are at 9 in the morning. And that's a natural rhythm. That's a natural alertness level that you may have. And so what we're seeing now, and this is what I go to the point of 10 years time, that most people in 10 years time will probably be working to their circadian rhythms a lot more. Maybe this lockdown has had a profound effect on allowing people to work to their circadian rhythms. And we've seen dramatic changes in sleep patterns throughout lockdown. And if you're constantly fighting against these circadian rhythms, it goes back to what we were saying. Not only does your performance levels on the short term drop and you're not able to perform to those levels, but also in the long term, you will then cause yourself to burn out because you're just building up a level of increased exhaustion and tiredness, mentally and physically.
So going back then to, what we'd be saying to managers, because when I'm talking with companies in terms of getting the best out of their people, it's very much about understanding what's getting in the way for people being their best and how to support them in terms of what they know will really enhance their ability to thrive. Would your advice then be that managers should perhaps be thinking more individually in terms of when people start work or finish work, or so that it suits individual employees and what their own particular rhythms are? Is that what you'd be suggesting?
In an ideal world, yeah, it would depend on whether or not there are certain time constraints or work constraints that are necessary, if they need to be open for markets or if they need to be working on projects at different times. But in the main, what we're seeing in more kind of outward looking companies are there's quite a few in California, there's quite a few in Germany that are working on people's chronotypes, so their own circadian rhythm. So most normally we would understand that as being a morning person or an evening person. And by knowing your employees' chronotype, you can then try and get the best out of them. If you know that someone is an evening person, trying to get them to be creative or pitch to them or talk to them early in the morning at 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. because that's when I'm going to send my email out, or 7 a.m. You're probably going to get a response which is of less quality or less well thought out, or probably a more of an emotive response than if you're going to get it when that individual is up. So what I do when I'm working with managers is to get them to understand the chronotypes of their employees. So-and-so is fantastic early in the morning. Right, okay, well, let's get you working early in the morning. And then when it gets to 5, 6 o'clock, I'm going to say, right, okay, let's reduce your workload. I don't want you working past this time because tomorrow morning I want you at your peak again.
Yes, and that comes to strong leadership again, doesn't it? Because I talk a lot about, leaders have to lead by example, and you have to behave in the way that you want people to behave. So if you're saying, because I can imagine some people would perhaps want their people want their employees who are really great in the morning to start, because it suits them. But actually, when it gets to 5 o'clock in the evening, I've just got this to do. Or can you just finish that? And actually, it's about then the kind of more senior people in the company saying, actually, you have to stop, and this is your time now to kind of recharge and do what you need to do.
Totally. Well, that goes back to the word you've mentioned a few times now, which is empathy. Yeah. And I've been reading quite a few articles recently on the fact that the most progressive managers are the most empathetic managers. The LinkedIn has recently posted and saying that empathy is the most important characteristic of a manager. Yeah. And so by understanding the needs and the wants of the individual and the sleep habits of the individual, they can start to work and be more empathetic and get the best out of them, really. But it also works the other way as well. So it's good to then communicate your own chronotype. To say, listen, if you're going to send me a tough question, if it's possible to send me it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're going to get a great response from me. If you send that to me at 6 in the morning and then you ask me to respond to it, it works both ways. Yeah. So the relationship is not just about how good are you at your work. The relationship is, who are you as an individual and how can I get the most out of you? Yeah. And how can we work the best together most cohesively?
And that comes back to that whole bit about workplace culture, doesn't it? In terms of good communication, and the communication's got to be two-way. So it's not kind of the managers or leaders telling people what to do, but it's very much about them having an opportunity to say, to ask actually, what is it you need? What is it you're like? What is it you prefer? And actually for managers, leaders to be able to share their own preferences as well. So it's very much two-way. And actually it's that sense of leveling everyone out. We are all human beings and we all fundamentally have the same kind of needs. And if we better understand each other's needs and how they kind of feel and what they look like for us individually when they're best met, then we get along a lot better.
Sure. And I've definitely come across some people I've worked with and some managers and some business leaders who have not really been engaged in this and thought, well, hold on a sec, this is the work that needs to be done. And my answer to that has always been that the most progressive leaders are the ones who are being the most empathetic at that time. And if you really want to truly get the best out of people and you want to attract the best people to work for you, then you have to try and find a way of getting them to work to their peak whenever they feel their peak is. We can see this in major corporations such as Apple, so they allow people to work to their chronotypes. You see major CEOs such as like Mark Zuckerberg doesn't take a meeting until 11 a.m. because he doesn't feel he's going to be able to produce his performance levels, but he'll quite happily work till later on. And so what you can also find is managers can have a much longer day. So if you have some people who are morning types and they're working from 6 a.m. in the morning quite happily until 4 in the afternoon, and then you get some people starting work at 9, 10 o'clock, and then they're working through until kind of 9, 10 o'clock in the evening. You get a much longer period of where people can work throughout your day in a proficient and high level and high quality way, rather than getting everyone to work throughout at kind of 50%.
So what would you say to, and this is a question that's very close to my heart at the moment, homeschooling 2 primary school children on top of trying to work. Lots of people are really struggling to juggle, and the demands are huge. What tips would you have for people trying to improve their sleep at a time when, I was saying to you before we hit record button today, that my sleep I know is going out the window because I can't get all my work done when I'm trying to teach my kids about Stone Age and adverbials and things knows what. And so then I'm trying to do it in the morning, before they start, and I'm trying to then do it in the evenings, which I generally, as a rule, I never work evenings because that's actually my time for me and my family. So right now, bearing in mind we're all having to do stuff quite differently during the lockdown, what would be your tips for helping people get better sleep?
I think it goes back to understanding that without enough sleep and without sufficient sleep, there is no real point in working the next day to the level that you want to work at, because your performance levels will be such low levels, 50-60%, that you're what's the expression? You're biting your nose off to spite your face. And I think that if it's the value in sleep, if people can start to value sleep really highly, then you'll start to prioritize sleep. And if you can say, look, I need to be asleep here at 10 o'clock because tomorrow I need to be able to perform. Otherwise, this is going to spiral out of control. And when it comes to the weekend, I'm going to be absolutely exhausted and I'm going to be sleeping in until 11 o'clock or whatever you can do. And that's what we call social jet lag. And that's this term social jet lag is the people who are burning the candle at both ends, are absolutely exhausted. And then when it comes to a free day, sleeping and wasting most of their free day. But unfortunately, the quality of sleep doesn't work like that. So if you're sleeping short periods of time, you're missing out on that quality sleep that we talked about, the memory consolidation and the cell restoration. And when you try and have a longer sleep, the effects of sleep is like a bell curve. So there will only be a significant time when you can actually improve, your memory consolidation. After that, whilst you're still asleep, you're not actually improving your learning or creativity at all. And so having banking sleep and trying to have it on different days doesn't work. So to answer your question, the first thing I would do is to try and get people to prioritize their sleep, even if it feels that they haven't got their work done. It's to understand that they then have to be able to perform better and be healthier the next day, and then so on and so forth. The other small tips that you can do is to do with light, and this is kind of my specialist area, is looking at the effects of light on performance. So during the daytime, we need to try and get as much daylight as possible, particularly in the morning. And that daylight will then tell our brains, right, this is the time where we need to be really alert. Unfortunately, our eyes are so brilliant that our eyes, you can't really tell the difference between artificial light, like I'm under now, and daylight, which is outside, because our eyes adjust so quickly. But there's a huge difference. So the lux in here is around kind of 300 lux, whereas outside on this kind of cold and cloudy day today, it's around 10,000 lux. So that's a hell of a lot more signals coming into the brain to say, right, okay, you need to be alert, and let's get your hormones flowing and moving around and getting you active and alert. And you're not getting the same stimulation inside. And then at nighttime, as most people are aware now, that blue light, which is screens and TV screens, even though kind of most screens have a blue blocker, a natural blue blocker nowadays, what that is, that's telling your brain that you need to be alert and awake, and that is stopping, that reduces your melatonin rise, and your melatonin facilitates the onset to sleep. Melatonin doesn't get you to sleep, but it just opens up the doorways to allow you to sleep, basically. So your hormones will be significantly affected by light, and if you can rebalance your hormones at the end of the day by reducing the amount of light you can have, then you'll put your body into a more natural state of sleep. And by the time you get to, try and work on a project at 11, 12 o'clock at night, if you haven't had that stimulation, your body will tell you that you need to go to sleep. So the main thing is to listen to your body and listen to it. And when you are tired, realize that it's not only affecting your performance, but it's affecting your health and well-being, and it's going to affect your mood, and it's going to affect your cognitive performance as well the next day. And so if you can understand this, then in the long term, you will have a much more productive life, physically and mentally.
And I guess also it's that whole, so just thinking about how that, just thinking about applying all that to my situation. And I guess it's when, if you're having to do work in the evenings, because that's actually when you tend to be at your best, or that's just a need because you've got homeschool and whatever else going on. It's not doing this stuff necessarily in front of a screen. So I always talk to people about actually switching off from work is good, because otherwise you're stimulating your brain and you go to bed and you wonder why you can't get sleep. But I guess also it's just that sense of, we're so stuck to screens nowadays that actually the whole idea of getting a notepad out and scribbling down some ideas or whatever is, I guess that's got to be kinder in terms of your sleep.
Certainly. Yeah, certainly. You can have little tricks, and you can buy things like blue blocker glasses, which block out all the blue light. You can try and reduce the amount of light in your house. So you can either use things like salt lamps or candles where safe and appropriate to use so, because that lux is one candle is 1 lux. So if you think a light is 300, it's just, you don't get the same signals. I think it's very hard to tell people that can't just turn off, that they need to turn off. But there are definitely ways that you can manage those situations. Just to understand the importance of sleep and understand that you can't catch sleep up at the weekend.
Yes.
Is a vital message to get out there.
And is there anything else in addition to what you've already said that you think companies perhaps should be doing to help people sleep better? So you've already talked kind of about fitting in with people's rhythms a bit more and so on. Is there anything else that companies could do?
It's this idea of presenteeism, I think. So being the first person to send the email off in the morning. So I used to get the train in when I used to work in the city. I used to get the train in at, I used to get the 5:38 train in. And when I used to sit down in my chair at 5:45, I'd send an email off. Just a group email to say, hi, I'm awake, everybody. Well, I wasn't saying that, but I was sending a message out to saying, I'm working super hard in the morning, and look at me. And then what does that do? That perpetuates the problem. And then the person who sat next to me goes, look, you were up early. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to have to get up and send a message out. And suddenly you create a culture of negative sleep. if you're working with someone and you know they're a morning person, and you've done your research and you've asked them questions and you found out about their life, and you found out that they love to get up at 5 in the morning and that they cycle into work or they go for a run in the morning and then they come into work and they're bright and chipper in the morning. If you're then sending them an email at midnight because you're working on a project, what you're saying to them is, you need to be awake at that time as well. Yeah. And you need to be responding to me because I'm awake at this time. And we are all awake 24 hours a day. Aren't we brilliant?
Yeah.
And you're not. You can't be brilliant without sleep.
So what about the people who use stimulants then? So what's the effect of stimulants on performance?
Well, so stimulants are a very interesting one. They're the first thing we kind of reach to try and perk up our performance. So things like caffeine is the obvious one. So people say, oh, I can't function without a cup of coffee, or it's fine if I work late night, I have a cup of coffee. So caffeine is a really interesting substance because it is the molecules in caffeine are the exact same shape and size to that of adenosine. And adenosine is what builds up in your body to tell you that you're tired. So as soon as you wake up, like a sand timer, you know, one of those timers of sand, opens up and starts to build up your adenosine levels throughout the day. If you have caffeine, those caffeine molecules stick to the receptors in the brain where the adenosine would normally build up, and it stops the adenosine going through. So you're becoming tired because you've been awake for such a long time, but the caffeine molecules are stopping you from feeling that you're tired, the effects of your tiredness. And then what happens is they eventually release, all the adenosine floods in, and then you go, oh, I'm so tired, and then you get exhausted. So what do? You have another coffee because you're tired, and you're perpetuating it. So the misconception about caffeine is that it gives you a stimulant. It perks you up. It makes you more alert. It doesn't. It just stops you from feeling tired. So if you can try and have your caffeine in the morning, whatever it is, tea, coffee, whatever it is. I know a lot of people at work drink Red Bull to get through the day and things, you know, such like that. But it has a half-life as well. So it will be in your system in 12 hours time. Half of it will still be in your system after 12 hours. So the truth is that just because you have it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon doesn't mean it's not going to affect you. At 3 a.m. in the morning, you're still going to have half the amount of caffeine in your system, stopping you from feeling tired. So if you can kind of have your last caffeine 12 hours before you think you're going to go to sleep, so maybe if you have a coffee in the morning, it might be really beneficial to you because it might make you feel great and you might love the taste of coffee and you want it as part of your culture. That's great. But if you can have 1 or 2 in the morning and then cut it from there, then that will help your sleep in the future. Same for alcohol as well. Alcohol is a stimulant and a sedative, so it will make you fall asleep, but it will then break your sleep up. So it will then cause your sleep to become broken throughout the night. So in actual fact, have a detrimental effect on your sleep. So alcohol in the evening is probably not that advisable either. And if you are going to have it at least 2 hours before you go to sleep. So some of it can kind of flush out of your system.
Lots of good advice. I think it's really interesting actually listening to everything you say, because there are so many good points that you make that I think are kind of aimed at everyone, whether you're a leader, a manager, an individual, to take responsibility for your own sleep. I think it's really important that when people kind of hear and process the advice that you're sharing, is to almost kind of go away and think about, how do I make that relevant and applicable to myself? Almost like coming up that sense of a plan. This is what I'm going to do differently. Because it's classic, isn't it? You kind of go, oh yeah, I need to go and improve my sleep. I'm definitely gonna go to bed earlier, or stop drinking coffee in the evening or whatever. And then actually, you slip back into your old patterns, because we're by nature being human creatures of pattern and habit. So I guess my thing that I'm going to do after this call is actually go and write kind of some key things down that I'm going to do differently. And also I'm going to go and share that with my husband, because I know that he actually is better at valuing sleep than me. So I know that actually having both of us on the same page will make a difference. It's more like my change is more like to happen having someone else on board saying, right, come on, he said it's 10 o'clock now. So it's kind of that social pressure to make sure we're changing our habits. Is there anything else you would say about that, or anything else you would want to add to finish off?
Well, it's the building of a positive culture, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what you're saying in your household is you're going to build a positive culture,
Yes.
and it will be individual to you as it will to your husband. So you might need to go to bed at different times, and have caffeine or work at different periods of the time, because sleep is all the same as the people's heights. We're all different heights, so we all need different amounts of sleep, and we need different times of sleep as well. But going back to this idea of creating a culture for managers in a workplace, to create a positive culture relies on a number of humans changing their behavior, or having positive behavior, and then that will start from the top. So this idea of being empathetic, or allowing your employees to work at the times which suit them, will build a positive culture. And if you're concentrating on your sleep, and you're valuing your sleep, and you see the benefits in it, which you will do if you have a sustained period of having good amounts of sleep by prioritizing your sleep, then what you'll be able to do is then see the benefit, and then impart that benefit and say, listen, sorry, don't send me an email at 10 o'clock at night. I'm winding down at that period. Or do send me emails at 10 o'clock at night. I am ready to go at that time, or whatever it is. Don't worry about sending me a late email, whatever it is. You are then imparting a conversation to have around the workplace about what is the best way for that individual to work. And if everyone is happy with the way that they work, and say, right, I know Bob down the road there doesn't like to get up that early, so let's have this meeting at 11 o'clock rather than at 9 o'clock. Therefore, you're creating a positive culture. So the leadership can occur from understanding the problem yourself, prioritizing the problem yourself, and then imparting good behavior and good habits onto the rest of the workplace. And so that's the best way that you can have a positive sleep culture. The other thing to do is try and get people to have as much light as possible as well, and work by a window, because you need as much daylight as possible. So to try and allow people in the office to either work as close to a window, or have as much light coming through into the building as possible. Or if you can I know you and I have spoken before on the phone, and we've had conversations outside, and being, people working from home, if you can do your one daily exercise, if you're going to be on the phone for an hour, grab your phone, grab your jacket, which is what I do every day, and go outside, and then get your sunlight throughout that way. And so there are lots of tiny, easy goals. And if I was a manager of 20, 30 people, I'd suggest that to people. I'd say, listen, if it's not raining, and if you want to go for a walk, I would suggest taking your calls outside, as long as you've got enough battery.
Nick, that's fantastic. I have loved chatting to you today. We could carry on talking, because it's such an interesting topic, and I think it's so relevant to every single person, which is one of the reasons also I think this is so relevant, because it doesn't matter who you are, what stage you're at in life, where you work, whether you work, sleep is just so important to get right. I think you shared loads of brilliant tips, loads of really good strategies for whoever you are. And I will make sure I've got your details that people can link through to, so people can contact you for further advice and support. So thank you so much, Nick.
Brilliant.
I'm really grateful for today. And let's have a conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I really appreciated it.
Thanks.